Alrighty, hello and welcome back to week two of the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel. I'm glad to have you here. All right, so getting right into it. Week two, week one of college football, great week. I had a fun time watching it. Most games, a little disappointed how the West Virginia Penn State game went, but we'll get there when we get there. So looking initially, we have a little bit of a shift in the top five. And then from there, pretty much everything is shaken up. We only have a couple teams still where they were, and everything else we will discuss. So, leading off at the top, Ohio State. Uh, I'm not gonna move them down because they didn't face hard enough competition per se. Um, I may do things like that later, but for now, Ohio State is going to stay up at number one. They played Akron. They had a really good game against them, as we expected. Jeremiah Smith debuted for them. Freshman, super young, crazy hands. I mean, he's the kind of player that you target every time you can. Hopefully this year he really can help open things up for Emeka Egbuka, which should go both ways. Unfortunately, though, we really won't get to see the Buckeyes play anybody super difficult for still another couple weeks. So unless something crazy happens in these next few games, it looks like until Big Ten play starts, they should probably stay at number one on this poll. Coming in at number two, still unchanged. Georgia. I did briefly consider moving Georgia up to number one after completely obliterating Dabo Swinney and Clemson. Like I said last week, it is really clear that there is something not right happening in Clemson, South Carolina right now. And I'm not sure if it's Dabo's fault. I'm not sure if he's just missing on a couple quarterbacks. I don't know if he's missing on a couple other players, but clearly this team is just not as in depth as it was a few years ago. And that team that he had a few years ago is just simply um not up to the same caliber, not able. It's just not a winning formula anymore. Uh but all hats off to Georgia. I mean, they just came in and proved they are still the team to beat. And like I said, if there's a team that can make it through that crazy gauntlet of a schedule they have, it's them. All right, now for our first change of the week, Texas moves up one. Yeah, Colorado State's not a bad team. Uh, Braden Fowler Nicolosi and Torrey Horton are a crazy good quarterback wide receiver duo for the Rams. Texas just came in and stomped them. Really, they obviously did not let them even score, and they had not one but two. Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning looked absolutely fantastic in that super dominant victory. And something that clearly wasn't at fault there was CJ Baxter. Went down in the preseason with a torn ACL, and Jarrett Gibson and Jaden Blue really picked up the slack and put collectively a very good game together. This is a team that, in my opinion, based off just the week one performance and preseason hype, is probably number three in national championship contention at the moment. Number four, moving up another spot, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide. Um, yeah, it doesn't quite look like Saban's old team, but it doesn't look like they've missed a beat either. Kalen DeBoer is letting them, be a little fun. Like we saw that sideline celebration that's very non-Saban-esque, and it's very clear that this is now Kalen DeBoer's time to shine. But at the same time, like Alabama looks just as dominant and just as good as ever. I mean, again, they played Western Kentucky, so it's not like they played the best competition in the world, but I mean, they went absolutely ham. I mean, Ryan Williams looked really, really good. He's only 17. Like a player like that can really elevate a program for years to come. And so, hopefully for Alabama's sake, they elevate him. He helps them elevate a lot this year. Moving on, the first team to move down in the rankings, Oregon. Now, I saw the AP poll and like Joel Klatt's poll and a lot of other polls had Oregon down at like 9 and 10. I'm not pressing the panic button after a geographic almost rivalry kind of game. I mean, obviously, Idaho is not up to the caliber that should be giving Oregon a fit like this, but this is a very heated game. Like the fans for Idaho, we're not looking at this thinking like, oh, we're an FCS team. It doesn't matter what. No, they came in and they pulled out all the stops. I think this is more of a case of Oregon looking past this and avoiding a near disaster, and Idaho coming in, and trying to prove something. I think I saw they haven't beaten Oregon since 1950, which is a really long time to not beat a team. Um, but yeah, I'm not pressing the panic button quite yet. I'm not they got beat up front in the trenches, but it's 40% new offensive line. I think that they're going to be just fine. And Dylan Gabriel threw for 380 yards. Like they clearly have offensive production. It just took a little longer than they probably wanted for uh took a little more, motivation to get them to win this game. They obviously did not cover. Speaking of not beating someone for a long time, West Virginia remains unable to beat Penn State. And I think the last time they said they beat them was Major Harris days in 1988. Penn State came into a very electric Morgantown, West Virginia, and they handled business. Um, Penn State has a new offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, he looked incredible. His play calling was stellar, and he continued to call up shots down the field that West Virginia's very clearly weak secondary could not handle. Um, it really felt like this game was just about over by when they scored in 22 seconds before the half. That being said, Drew Aller really got to stretch the field this year, and on the this year. Drew Aller really got to stretch the field during this game. Uh, you know, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen looked really good as always. Um, and they really dominated in the trenches. But that defense, I want to highlight that defense. That defense looks dangerous. They also had a new defensive coordinator debut as well. And probably what made this defense, besides just getting pressure on the quarterback, was Abdul Carter. He wore number 11, but he played the position and looked smack like Micah Parsons. He basically filled every need that he needed to fill, and there was just no room for West Virginia to move the ball, and it was just very good game for Penn State, very bad game for the Mountaineers. All right, Mizzou. The Brady Cook Luther Burden connection is alive and well. They they had they played an FCS school like they usually do at this point in the year. Well, a common theme today is going to be teams playing lower competition or FCS schools and just you know hopefully making it out of there alive. Some of them absolutely dominating. In this case, what I want to highlight more than just the quarterback wide receiver duo and Brady Cook and Luther Burden was App State transfer Nate Noel and last year's running back Marcus Carroll just absolutely running all over the opposing team. This Missouri team looks about as advertised. If you could have said preseason they were a dark horse contender, and with a relatively easy schedule, like I said last week, comparatively to what they had last year, we could absolutely see this team compete for the playoffs or maybe even compete for an SEC title. Speaking of competing for SEC titles and other maybe various awards, Jackson Dart had probably the best week of any quarterback in the country. Played roughly the first half and ended the day 22 for 27 with 418 yards and 5 touchdowns. Again, I'm going to say this a whole bunch. Warm up game, warm up game, warm up game. But you got to be some level of impressive in order to be able to put up almost half of 1,000 yards in 27 attempts in half of a football game. I mean, they clearly were not missing much from Quinshon Judkins, at least not as much as we saw. And uh, Their wide receivers, Trey Harris, looked great. Um, and their defense, was shut down, which is going to be a key factor. I personally think that whichever defense shows up the most in college football this year, in the SEC specifically, is going to be the team that will end up taking home the SEC title and potentially the chip. Moving out of the SEC, Notre Dame had maybe their toughest game of the year. Later on their schedule, they have USC and Florida State, and talk about Florida State later. But I mean, outside of that, if they finish 12-0, 11-1, even 10-2, they're probably finding themselves in the playoffs. Now, for those who don't know how the playoff system works, the top four seeds are the four Power Four division winners. Then 5 through 11 are the best, are the CFP rated next 5 through 11, and then the 12th is going to be the highest rated Group of Five divisional champion. So in this case, since Notre Dame is not in a conference, they are not eligible to win. They're not eligible to be a 1 through 4 seed. So even if they are the number one seed in the country or the number two or any top seed, they will be no higher than the fifth seed coming to the playoffs. But that means they can still host a playoff game. If they do this and they go 12-0 and they just had one of their toughest games in College Station. I mean, Riley Leonard looked great, and he didn't have the craziest stats in the world, but he looked really good. Their running back Love looked awesome too. They had a great run game. And it seemed like they were a super well conditioned team, considering that we were watching Connor Weigman throw up on the sideline. Like this team is definitely different than the ones in years past. I believe last week I said that every year we get tricked into Notre Dame being a top 10 team, top 5 team, and they always end up choking. They always end up losing a big one early, and we all look silly. They could be for real this year, and we really won't get a chance to see them, choke against a good team or a team that they are maybe just slightly higher ranked than until the very end when they play USC. Um, but we'll see what happens. Definitely looking forward to watching some more Riley Leonard Fighting Irish play. All right, now for our first Big 12 team, Utah. They're down one, but that's more of a other teams impressed me more. Um, but not much more impressive than Cam Rising and also running back Dijon Stanley. Cam Rising threw for 5 touchdowns and 254 yards. Pretty standard I think they played Southeastern Utah, so nothing right. Again, another FCS team, nothing crazy. But Dijon Stanley led the Utah Utes in rushing and receiving. He took 3 receptions for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, along with almost 100 rushing yards, I believe. He had a heck of a day. Almost 250 all-purpose yards and 3+ touchdowns is, against anybody is going to be a crazy good stat line. But we will have to see how Utah stacks up again, like everybody, against some actual Big 12 competition. Still, in my opinion, one of the deepest and hopefully most fun conferences going into this year. Number 11, a team that I'm getting increasingly higher on every day, specifically higher on quarterback Nico Iamaleava. I'll say it right eventually if I'm not saying it right now. They played Chattanooga. It's again not a very good team, but we don't have to wait very long for these guys to end up going against some better competition. NC State and then play in Bank of America Stadium next week in North Carolina. It's a neutral site game for the Volunteers and Wolfpack, so hopefully that'll give us a little better of a gauge on how good they are. But they looked really, really good. That defense looked incredible, and if Nico, being that young quarterback that he is, has a lot of growing that he can do and will do, and if he continues to look this dynamic, then who knows? Like watching him spin the ball is very magical. He has such a pretty arm pattern. and absolutely just floats it in. The majority of his passes were just on the money, on target, in stride. It's something that it's the difference between um a Joe Milton 80-yard bomb and this Nico Iamaleava floating it right into the breadbasket. All right, number 12, Michigan, our biggest faller so far. They dropped 12 spots. They they won 30-10 against Fresno State. Kind of a another similar thing where I'm not pressing the panic button on anything like talent or anything like their ability to be a team like they were last year. I am a little bit the alarm bells are a little bit going off for the fact that I don't think they've really ironed down who their starting quarterback is going to be. They let Davis Warren start this game after it seemed like there was going to be a consensus Alex Orji start. But and he had Davis Warren didn't play bad. Um, he did have an interception, I believe, but this Michigan team definitely seems like they came in here feeling like the national champions from last year and playing a little more like early season or early tenure Jim Harbaugh. Um, we will see though. They have a lot of growing to do and a lot of growing they can do, and for the Michigan fans, as long as they're ready by November 30th, when the game is, they don't care how the rest of the season goes. Um, I also need to apologize to my Michigan fans for last week. I said the only player that might be better than James Pierce Jr. On defense in college this year was Caleb Downs. I I think that Will Johnson is definitely also up there in that conversation. I think that uh, it was remiss of me not to mention him in the same breath as Caleb Downs and James Pierce Jr. Number 13, jumping up a couple spots. We have the USC Trojans who won a big one in Vegas on Sunday. It looks like Lincoln Riley did it again, right? Miller Moss looked the part. He looked awesome. And good for him. He spent his time behind Caleb. He sat there. He got his opportunities when they came, and now he's the starting quarterback, and he looks great. I mean, who knows? Who knows down the road what this will actually look like? But it looks like USC got the thing that we were fearing. It looks like they got themselves a defense that really stood tall when they needed to stand tall. That defense got the game sealing interception. The run game with Joe Quavius, or now Woody Marks, as he now goes. I don't remember him going by that at Mississippi State, but Joquavius Marks punching it in to really seal the game. I think this was a heck of a game by USC and a heck of a coach game by Lincoln Riley. And Brian Kelly has has some soul searching to do there. I've been pretty vocal that I'm not totally sure Garrett Nussmeier is the answer. I think he had uh, a pretty solid game, um, but I mean, we'll get to see a little later. But it's looking right now like we were thinking the winner of this game had a much better shot at making the playoff, and it's looking right now uh, like LSU is very much on the outside looking in. Another team at 14 that took down some SEC competition was the Miami Hurricanes, and man, Mario Cristobal did it. He shut down everything this offseason as far as media getting into practices, leaking anything he wanted to leak. They came in there, new technology, new personnel, new quarterback, and threw a touchdown to Chad to McCormick, the ninth year super senior, right? Cam Ward looked effortless out there. Kind of similar to Nico Iamaleava. Iamaleava. He looked great. He floated the ball exactly how he needed to. He looked absolutely stunning, driving the ball down the field. I don't know if you guys remember last week, but I said if this game turns into a Xavier Restrepo Eugene Wilson track meet, it's not going to be that fun. And I said I'll be impressed if Miami puts together sustained drives And that's exactly what they did. Miami came in, controlled the ball, put in sustained drives, and that defensive line that we've heard so much about, we've now heard about Clemson and Florida State's defensive lines, how they could be the best in the country. I think it's pretty possible that Miami has the best defensive line in the country. I mean, that definitely in the ACC. I mean, that defensive line did amazing um, in this game, and I really don't think that Florida ever really had a chance. And then Miami running over and dapping up the Florida recruits. Seems like seems like Miami walked out of there with more than just a couple Gator tails. They might have walked out of there with some new recruits as well. Number 15, Oklahoma moved up a spot, the Oklahoma Sooners, purely because they made Temple look like a high school team. Like they didn't beat them by 50 points, but I mean, Deion Burks looked dominant, so they finally have like that number one wide receiver to kind of separate himself. Between him and Jalil Farouk and a couple others, you kind of looking who's going to separate themselves. And I believe Farouk sustained some sort of injury in this game, so it's looking like Deion Burks is going to be Jackson Arnold's main target this season. But this team just, and as we expected against this a program like Temple, looked bigger, faster, stronger in every way, shape, or form. They really dominated out there this weekend. But not every game will be this easy. 6 of the next 10 games are against ranked SEC competition, and another couple of them will be against teams who could, in theory, be ranked by the time that they play. Um, so we're just gonna have to see how it all plays out. But again, Oklahoma just has an absolute gauntlet of a schedule coming up. All right, number 16, moving up 2 spots, the Arizona Wildcats. Oh my God. Teteroa McMillan. I just called him McMillan last time because I wasn't sure how to pronounce his first name, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. But Teteroa McMillan, he deserves his first and last name said after that 304-yard, 4-touchdown performance that he put on New Mexico. It was a close game. I mean, at the beginning of the game, they let New Mexico quarterback Devon Dampier run absolutely wild. He amassed 390 total yards and 5 touchdowns, including a couple turnovers. And going into, I believe, about halfway through the second quarter, Noah Fifita uh, threw an interception, and you're thinking, wow, I mean, maybe Arizona, all the hype wasn't there. Maybe they're just, maybe they're going to be in a little bit of trouble. And then Teteroa McMillan took over. I mean, he had himself a heck of a game. Uh, like I said, amassing 304 yards and 4 touchdowns. Uh, to complement this running back tandem of Ja'Cory Croskett Merritt and Quali Conley, combining for nearly 200 more yards and 4 more touchdowns. This offensive production is going to be really hard to be matched in the Big 12. And I'll be really interested if schools like Utah and Kansas, now with a new offensive coordinator, and Kansas State can actually keep up with it, and maybe even schools like Oklahoma State kind of supplementing this passing offense with their run game, which we'll get to, but still looked pretty impressive. All right, number 17. They dropped 4 spots, and I'm inclined to think they're going to drop even more. But we'll see how it goes. I'm not gonna. I don't want to predict. I don't want to predict downfall in any program yet. But number 17, Clemson. Yep, you probably guessed it. The 0-1 start. While it was to a very good Georgia team, it was an embarrassing. It is painfully clear that Clemson is just not on the same level as the Bulldogs as now, or really any of the upper 1 to 2 echelons of college football competition at the moment. The reason why, really, that I think they're still on this list, well, I put them on this list here, but the reason why they're here is really just because of their overall talent composite. They're still a crazy talented team, and really the reputation of Dabo Swinney. I mean, whether or not this kind of downfall is his fault at this point or not, we'll still yet to be seen. But I think that what I said last week, where it looks like this Clemson dynasty, this Dabo Swinney era of ball in Clemson, is this style of play coming from coming from the Tigers is just it's not working anymore. It worked really well in 2020, in 2021. Um, Worked really well in 2018, worked really well in 2016. And just when you don't change things and adapt, it doesn't, nothing, you're not going to get better. And they just haven't gotten better. They clearly just don't have the depth to compete in the SEC. And I think this is going to be really interesting in a couple years when the inevitable more conference realignment happens and sees where these kind of programs are and will go. Um, yeah, that's a conversation for a different podcast and a different day. But Clemson is worrying me a little bit as far as they are not only just this season, but as a program. Moving on, team that complete opposite of Clemson, I think, is on the total up and up. The Nebraska Cornhuskers. I mean, Dylan Raiola looked great out there. He, was fun arm angles, moving the ball, stepping up in the pocket. This is going to be a really big challenge for him this weekend against Colorado. But this is probably upcoming my number two game of the week, maybe even number one. This, in my opinion, is maybe even more exciting than Michigan, Texas. I mean, Michigan, Texas will tell us a lot more about where certain teams are in the landscape of college football. But Nebraska versus Colorado, I mean, you're talking about a super flashy Colorado program that has players with super high ceilings. Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, which we'll get to. Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter looking better than they could possibly look. And then you have, the already, one game against UTEP proclaimed Lord and Savior of the Nebraska Cornhusker Nation, Dylan Raiola, who, I mean, it's hard to argue that he hasn't looked really, really good. And also this Nebraska team looks like a much more complete team right now than Colorado. I mean, their number one wide receiver, Isaiah Nealer, is probably not the kind of player that either Jimmy Horn or Travis Hunter are, but he's a very good security blanket for a young quarterback who seems like he almost doesn't really need one. Moving back to the Big 12, Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon continues to impress. I mean, he looks, he put up over 100 yards this game, coupled with a pair of touchdowns. Alan Bowman, the super, 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 add 10 more super senior, also looked phenomenal. The defense looked great. And, I don't think that this is the same case as some of the earlier ones. We can say, oh, it was an FCS opponent. What'll they do it against real competition? I would say the South Dakota State University Jackrabbits are very real competition. They're in the number one ranked FCS team, and they're coming off of an FCS national championship. This team could be a mid-tier ACC, Big 12, lower tier SEC, maybe not SEC, Big 10 school, right? This team is playing at a much higher level than your average FCS competition, and so I think that Oklahoma State winning, and not just winning, but covering and winning by a good margin, really puts Mark Gundy and his Cowboys in a really good place. And if Ollie Gordon can keep running like this behind this super veteran, super awesome offensive line, then I see no reason why Oklahoma can't have just as good of an offensive shot, just as good of a shot as any other team in the Big 12 at this point. Speaking of teams in the Big 12, Kansas State played a much different team than South Dakota State. They played Tennessee Martin, another FCS team. And if you look at the box score, right, you would say, oh, this was a blowout. They won by like 4 touchdowns. It was crazy. We all expected this. They looked a little sloppy, honestly. I wanted to move them up more after seeing this box score, but after seeing them play, I just didn't think they played like a better than the 20th best team, if that makes sense. Um, Kansas State is, they are a very talented team, and Avery Johnson is a very talented quarterback from what we've seen, but I just really felt like he didn't seem as comfortable out there as we were accustomed to him seeing in as accustomed as you can be in seeing him in the one game that we actually saw him play. But that being said, we're they're playing bad teams. They're playing, or not, maybe not bad teams, but they're playing lower competition, and it's week one. First year as a starting quarterback, as the full time starting quarterback. There's going to be some rust that has to come off. There's going to be some things to shake off. So I think that, am I worried about Kansas State? No, I'm not worried about Kansas State. I'm not worried about almost any team on this list except for Clemson, LSU, and I mean Colorado, maybe. Like, there's a couple teams that I'm worried about, but outside of that, I'm really not worried about Kansas State. They're going to be totally fine. Number 21, a team that I thought looked great in everything I didn't think they'd look great in, which was Iowa. Um, Cade McNamara looked better than he did in his 2021 season, and they just played like they had a very good offensive game plan and structure that was unstoppable. I mean, Caleb Johnson was unable to be tackled, it seemed like. And I mean, as long as they can keep producing even a semblance of this style of offense, we don't need Cade to throw for 350 yards every game. But if he can average 250 and a touchdown or two every game, I mean, that's probably better than he was averaging last year, maybe even better than he was averaging in his 2021 season. I mean, he clearly has showed he has the capability to lead an effective offense. We just have to make sure that he does it against Big Ten competition. Moving on, one of the teams I just said I was worried about, LSU, and I'm not as worried about the players. Right, they have some very very talented players on this team. I am worried about their head coach. Um, he's punching tables and really seems to be struggling right now. Um, I mean, Brian Kelly came into a very, very good situation. He had a Heisman winning quarterback, and now it seems like his offense, although is super super talented and has a crazy talent index. I think that he, for some reason, is struggling. I think this team is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Um, right. So not sure what LSU is going to become right now, but with that loss to USC, they are absolutely on the outside looking in. Number 23, our first new team on this list is the Kansas Jayhawks. This team is a team that is different than last year. Jalen Daniels looked different, and I think part of that is injury related things, but they definitely relied a lot more on Devin Neal in the run game. And Devin Neal looked great. Do not get me wrong. They looked like a very, very good team. And with a relatively light Big 12 schedule going forward, I mean, they could definitely be playing some meaningful games come November, whether or not that's competing for a Big 12 championship or maybe even competing for an outside spot in the playoff. But they're going to have to somehow figure out how to get more production out of Jalen Daniels after losing someone like Andy Kotelnicki, who we mentioned earlier, who went to Penn State. I just think that they are not utilizing some of their weapons like Lawrence Arnold exactly how they should be. They really only used him in short gains and really stuck to the ground. I'm not sure if that's a comfort thing or if that is a uh, or just a lack of offensive creativity. All right. Moving into 24, we got 24, 25, a couple things of housekeeping to wrap up, and then I'll see you next week. So moving into 24, the Colorado Buffaloes. Um, I said last week that I wanted to drink the Kool-Aid and I wanted to be all in on what Dion was cooking up. And frankly, if I almost didn't want to keep them in my top 25 this week, I just didn't think there was anyone else as deserving to take their spot, if I'm being honest. They won the game. They won a hard-fought game, but the exact same problems that we wanted them to fix coming into this year are alive and well. They won. They beat an FCS team. It's kind of a similar situation to Oklahoma State, where very good FCS team, a very storied culturally FCS team, um, but still an FCS team. And if you're coming in with a top five quarterback in the league and maybe the best outside of quarterback player in Travis Hunter in the entire, college football landscape, then I would expect you to be able to come in uh, and beat them, cover the spread, beat them by anything more than just having to rely on a non Hail Mary situation. I I think I heard somewhere that it was Shadur who decided to go for the deep balls on first down. You just can't let your quarterback do that, right? Like I mean, two things. Like one, you're looking at intentional defiance by Shadur, and thinking he's all that, which, like, his ego's always been something that has either turned people really on or really off to him. But there's either needs to be some sort of hierarchy, and right now it seems like that hierarchy is Dion, Shadur, and Travis, and then everyone else, and coaches included. And so you just can't let your quarterback do that. And as the quarterback, you need to know that, like, your stats should not be being padded here. You should be going for the win. Uh you should be handing the ball off, which you have a really good running back. Hayes is a very talented running back. He really just got leveled out in kind of pushed out in Ohio State because they already have a very talented running back tandem. You are not, you have a good running back. You have the players around you to make this work. Maybe that offensive line is questioned, but I mean, you at least keep the clock moving or make them burn timeouts. I don't understand letting your quarterback do that. Um, and the other big concern for me is Travis Hunter. He played 129 out of 131 snaps. And one of the snaps he had to miss because his helmet fell off, not to mention several other special teams plays. He is the most talented player in college football right now. I have no doubt about that. But he will not be the most talented player if you play him 98% of the snaps. If you're letting this person fizzle out after 4 weeks and get injured and maybe even ruin their post college chances, you're doing him a disservice. You're doing your team a disservice, and I just don't understand the thought process. Travis Hunter is probably your most talented wide receiver, hands wise. Jimmy Horn might give him a run for overall wide receiver this year. Um, I mean, look, we saw Travis Hunter make arguably the best catch of the year, getting draped by the NDSU cornerback, catching that. That was an incredible catch. Um, but give the man some breaks. It's fine to play him on both offense and defense. He's probably the best cornerback in the country, as well as a top 5 to 10 wide receiver in the country. He's valuable on both sides, but he doesn't need to play maybe in running downs or any special teams or maybe some first down non-deep shot defensive plays, right? Like there are ways you can find to rest him that are not going to have him completely expend his entire bag of energy starting, you know, starting 98% of the plays. And finally, to round out the top 25, another Big 12 school, the TCU Horned Frogs. I thought that was a really impressive and gutsy win against Stanford. I know Stanford is not the greatest team, but Josh Hoover and Jack Beck looked great and looked very much in sync. And I feel like we forget that Sonny Dykes took a squad not too dissimilar from this to a national championship a couple years ago, just 2 years ago. Now, I know they got blown out, but they still were, undefeated going into the Big 12 championship and were playing better than almost anybody in the country. I mean, they beat Michigan, who was just 2 years removed, or was just a year removed from winning a national championship. Right? They beat the next year's national champions. In the playoffs. So I mean, Sonny Dykes is still probably a top 10 head coach in college football, and I feel like them being off 1 year does not discount this team as a team. And I think this was a good win for them. But if they can continue to build off this, we could blink our eyes. It could be week 8, and they could be an undefeated team. Uh, Rounding out this all, the honorable mentions. You got Vanderbilt, Iowa State, Cal, App State, Tulane, Liberty, Boise State, Duke, NC State. And I told myself to put these two on there, but on the official A to Z poll, they are not. I'm just going to add them on now. Georgia Tech and Boston College. Now, a little bit of bonus content. Florida State. Just want to talk about them for a minute. DJ Uungalai, it sucks, but he just is not the answer. Um, he is a talented player, and I think this is almost a situation like of the opposite of Iamaleava, and the opposite of like Rayola, like I was talking about earlier, where he has a strong arm, but he does not have like a quarterback. So he wasn't placing the ball well. That's not like he was getting a ton of help either. The entirety of Florida State is looking in shambles right now. This team is not looking like an impressive team at all. They don't look like a preseason top 10 team. They don't look like a preseason top 25 team. They A lot of people are saying their playoff hopes are just about zero, and they would need a lot to go right for them to make it, and they would have to start winning some very impressive games if they even have much on the roster. Like I know they have Notre Dame, and if they go in and somehow beat an undefeated Notre Dame team, presumed undefeated Notre Dame team in 5 weeks, maybe we start looking at them differently. But the entire ACC, including Florida State, is just not looking very good outside of Miami. I mean, I mentioned Vanderbilt on there. They they took down uh, they went and took down Virginia Tech, a team that a lot of people were considering to be a very good team and a very big contender for the for the ACC. Um, Clemson lost, Florida State lost again. I mean, really the presumed powerhouses of the conference are just sitting there now in shambles, except for Miami. And we'll see. Florida State could end up looking like a much less impressive win in a few weeks if Billy Napier ends up getting fired, which he won't. I think they owe him like 85% of his contract, like almost $30 million if they fire him. But I mean, if he loses the next 2-3 games and he's 0-4, 0-5, I could absolutely see them trying to cut their losses and maybe try to save face a little bit. Um, Outside of that, some good games to watch this week. You're looking at number 3 Texas and number 11 Michigan. You got Eastern Kentucky versus Western Kentucky. Apparently, Western Kentucky was planning on a whiteout, but Eastern Kentucky decided after Western Kentucky advertised it, Eastern Kentucky exercised their visitors' rights and are wearing white uniforms. So they're still doing the whiteout, but the Hilltoppers are wearing red, and Eastern Kentucky is wearing white. So we'll see. A lot of interesting games this week. Um, have fun watching them. Have fun paying attention to some college football. Hopefully your team wins, and see you guys next week.